Britain in the 60s and 70s served up some meals that could turn your stomach before you even picked up a fork. From brains on toast to jellied eels wobbling on the plate, these were the dishes that tested your nerve and, as the old saying goes, put hair on your chest.
Number 1. Tripe.
Tripe was the sort of thing that could clear a room before it even reached the table. If you've never seen it raw, picture pale sheets of honeycomb, soft and rubbery, smelling faintly of the farmyard. That's cow's stomach, boiled up and served as dinner. It wasn't rare in the 60s and 70s. Butchers sold it cheap, and plenty of families stretched their budgets with it. In some kitchens it was cooked in milk with onions until it turned floppy and bland. In others, it was fried or stewed, and the smell hung in the house long after the plates were cleared. Kids often sat staring at their portions, poking at it with a fork, wondering how on earth it was meant to be eaten. The texture was the real battle. Chewy, a bit squeaky between your teeth, with that odd sponge-like bite. People who grew up with it will tell you it was an acquired taste, but plenty never quite acquired it. It was the sort of food that made you concentrate on swallowing fast, chasing it down with potatoes or bread just to get it past your throat. Still, tripe had its defenders. Older generations swore by it, calling it wholesome, full of goodness, what we used to eat in the war. And if you went north, to places like Lancashire, you'd find entire stalls in markets dedicated to the stuff, seasoned with vinegar and salt and sold in little tubs. It was normal then, even if it makes people shudder now. For kids in the 70s, though, tripe was less about nourishment and more about endurance. If you could chew your way through a plate without gagging, you'd proven yourself at the dinner table.
Number 2. Brain on toast.
Brains showed up in the butchers the way any other offal did, laid out in trays, pale and strange, sitting there next to kidneys and livers. To some households, they were just another cut, cheap protein when money was tight. To others, they were something to avoid at all costs. The most common way was simple. Fry them gently and heap them on toast, sometimes seasoned with pepper, sometimes masked with parsley or a bit of onion. But there's no disguising the look. Soft, greyish, almost custardy when cooked. The texture caught people off guard. Creamy one moment, then grainy the next. Some swore it melted in your mouth. Others swore they'd never touch it again. Plenty of kids had the same reaction, staring down at the plate, thinking it looked more like school science than dinner. Parents would push the old line, waste not, want not, and insist it was good for you, rich in protein, apparently good for the brain itself, though that never really convinced anyone. There was also a faint air of embarrassment about it, like serving brains meant you hadn't much money. Families that could afford better cuts usually didn't bother, but for those who did eat it, it was just normal, passed down through habit more than choice. Ask around now and most people will laugh at the memory. Some will say they like the taste, others gag just thinking about it. Either way, brain on toast has slipped out of kitchens for good reason. In the 60s and 70s, though, it was still on plenty of tables, a dish that tested your stomach before you even lifted your fork.
Number 3. Lamb's fry.
Lamb's fry wasn't a single thing, it was a mix. Liver, kidneys, sometimes the heart, and in older recipes even the testicles, all fried up together in a pan, usually with onions and a splash of gravy, then tipped onto a plate with mash or bread. It sounds brutal now, but back then it was just another way to make sure nothing went to waste. The smell filled the kitchen before it even hit the table. Strong, rich, sometimes sharp from the kidneys, sometimes almost sweet if the liver was cooked soft. Parents would talk about it as proper food, packed with iron, the sort of thing that kept you going. But kids usually wrinkled their noses, chewing slowly, wishing they could swap plates. The textures were all over the place. One bite was tender, another chewy, another almost chalky. If you weren't used to it, it was like a lucky dip of discomfort. Still, plenty of people grew up eating it every week. It was cheap, it was filling, and it came from animals that were already being butchered for other cuts. In pubs, lamb's fry sometimes showed up as hearty fare for older blokes, often washed down with a pint. At home, it was more of a weekday meal, the sort of thing that stretched far on a small budget. It didn't pretend to be refined, and nobody served it to impress. It was just offal, fried up, plain and simple. Ask around today and you'll find a split. Some remember it fondly, others with a shudder. Either way, lamb's fry was part of everyday eating in the 60s and 70s, the kind of dish that stuck with you, whether you wanted it to or not.
Number 4. Brawn, head cheese.
Brawn was the sort of food that looked more like a dare than a meal. It started with a pig's head, boiled down for hours until every scrap of meat loosened from the bone. Cheeks, tongue, bits you wouldn't normally think twice about tossing. All of it fished out, chopped up, and pressed into a mould with the broth. Leave it to set, and by the next day you had a solid block of cold meat jelly. That was brawn. Slices came out pale, streaked with darker chunks, wobbling on the plate like something half forgotten at the back of the fridge. Eaten cold, sometimes with vinegar or mustard to cut through the fattiness. It was never glamorous, but in plenty of households it was cheap and filling, and that was enough. The texture was the hurdle. One mouthful might be soft and fatty, the next gristly, the next mostly jelly that stuck to the roof of your mouth. Some people genuinely liked it, swearing it was full of flavour. Others couldn't get past the sight of it, let alone the chew. Kids especially, plenty sat at tables staring at a slice of brawn as if it might start moving. Markets sold it ready-made, slabs wrapped in paper, and older folks would pick it up without hesitation. For them, it was tradition, tied to a time when wasting any part of the animal wasn't an option. But for anyone who grew up after rationing, it felt more like a relic. One of those foods you ate because it was there, not because you wanted to. Ask people about it now and you'll see faces twist. Brawn wasn't subtle and it didn't try to be. It was the pig, boiled down and set cold, staring back at you from the plate.
Number 5. Chitterlings.
Chitterlings were exactly what the name tried to hide. Pig intestines. Cleaned, boiled and stewed until they softened, then sometimes fried to crisp the edges. On paper it sounded like thrift, making use of every bit of the animal. On the plate, it tested your nerve. The smell hit first. Even after cleaning, even after boiling, there was this farmyard tang that filled the kitchen. Some said you never quite got rid of it. Neighbours would know what was cooking without even stepping through the door. The texture didn't help. Tough in places, rubbery in others, with that strange chew that didn't let go straight away. Older relatives ate them without fuss, spooning them down with potatoes or bread, maybe a splash of vinegar to sharpen the taste. Kids, though, often pushed them around the plate, hoping the dog would do them a favour. In some parts of the country, chitterlings were a winter dish, big pots simmering on stoves, steam fogging the windows. They were tied to older traditions back when nothing of the pig went to waste. To families who grew up on them, they were ordinary. To anyone else, they were close to unthinkable. Looking back, most people don't remember the flavour so much as the smell and the battle with the texture. Chitterlings weren't the kind of food you slipped down easily. You had to decide you were going to eat them, and then grit your teeth until the plate was clean.
Number 6. Pig's trotters.
The sight of them was often enough. A pair of boiled pig's feet sat on the plate, knuckles showing, skin stretched tight and shiny. You didn't need telling what they were. It was obvious the moment they landed in front of you. Eating them took patience. There wasn't much meat to be had, and what there was clung stubbornly to the bone. People picked and sucked, pulling at scraps, chewing through skin that had gone soft and gelatinous in the pot. The broth thickened as it cooled, turning sticky, leaving a layer on the lips. For older folks, trotters carried nostalgia. they'd talk about childhood suppers, where nothing of the pig went to waste. A stew bubbling away for hours, the smell creeping through the house, plates clattering as everyone dug in. For younger ones, it was closer to a trial. Not much reward for all the effort, and the look of the thing was hard to get past. You could find them pickled too. Jars behind bar counters, a trotter pulled out dripping with vinegar. Some swore it was the perfect companion to a pint. Others watched in horror, glad it wasn't their turn.
Number 7. Tongue.
The shock usually came before the first bite. A whole ox tongue laid out on a butcher's counter didn't look much different from how it did inside the animal. Big, grey, rough on the surface, with that shape you couldn't mistake. For plenty of shoppers in the 60s and 70s, it was a sight they tried not to dwell on. Once cooked, though, it was transformed into something else entirely. Boiled or braised, then pressed and sliced thin, tongue turned up cold on sandwich plates or as part of a buffet. On the plate, it looked like ham. Neat pink slices with a darker edge until someone mentioned what it was, and then the thought of it curled back around in your mind. The flavour wasn't terrible. In fact, many said it was tender, rich and easy to eat. The problem was the knowledge of what you were chewing. Kids especially struggled. Some would eat the sandwiches happily until a parent let slip it was tongue. After that, it was hard to take another bite. Plenty of families bought tinned tongue too, a pressed, gelatinous version that slid out of the can with a metallic tang. Cheaper, convenient and common at picnics. But the texture wasn't doing it any favours. People who grew up with tongue often defend it now, calling it underrated, while others pull a face just remembering. For all its ordinary taste, the memory of seeing it whole at the butcher's made sure it was never just another slice of meat.
Number 8. Sheep's head.
Imagine lifting the lid on the pot and seeing eyes staring back at you. That was sheep's head, boiled whole, sometimes singed to get rid of the wool, then cooked down until the meat loosened from the skull. It wasn't hidden or disguised. What came to the table still looked very much like a head. For older generations, especially in rural areas, this was normal. Every part of the animal had a use, and the head was no different. Cheeks were tender, the tongue tucked inside was sliced out and served. And yes, some people even ate the eyes. A bit of salt, maybe some vinegar, and nothing was wasted. For kids, though, it was nightmare fuel. You couldn't ignore what you were eating because it was looking straight back at you. Some would poke around carefully, pulling at little scraps of meat, while others flat out refused to touch it. Parents would shake their heads saying, "This is good food." And technically, it was. Cheap, filling, and part of a tradition that went back centuries. The smell was heavy, strong mutton that clung to the air, and the broth turned gelatinous as it cooled. To some, that richness was exactly the point. To others, it was enough to make the stomach turn before the first bite. Ask about it now, and most people laugh nervously, unsure if you're joking. But in the 60s and 70s, sheep's head was still on tables in parts of Britain, a meal that asked you to be brave before you even picked up your fork.
Number 9. Roll mops.
First bite was always the hardest. Cold fish flesh, slick with vinegar, wrapped tight around a sliver of onion or a pickle. The toothpick came out and suddenly you were committed. No going back once it was in your mouth. Plenty of people never got that far. They'd eye the jar on the counter, fillets of herring rolled up like little scrolls floating in cloudy brine, and decide to leave it well alone. But in the 60s and 70s, these jars turned up everywhere. In delicatessens, in pubs, and in kitchens where preserved foods were still part of daily life. For those who liked them, roll mops had a bite that woke you up, sharp vinegar, a crunch of onion, and a sour tang that cut through the fishiness. For everyone else, the combination was too much. Slimy texture, strong flavour, and a sourness that lingered long after you'd swallowed. They weren't meant to be glamorous. Roll mops were practical, cheap, and they kept well. They came from a time when preserving fish wasn't optional. It was how you made it last. But as the years went by, they became more of a curiosity, the sort of thing you remembered seeing on a shelf and wondering who on earth bought them. Ask anyone who tried one as a kid, and you'll get the same scrunched-up face. Roll mops weren't friendly food. They were something you braved, and once was often enough.
Number 10. Jellied eels.
If you wanted jellied eels, you went looking for them. Pie and mash shops, tiled walls, vinegar bottles lined up on the counter, and in the trays sat chunks of eel, set firm in a wobbling jelly. It wasn't something you stumbled across by accident. It was a tradition in parts of London, especially the East End. The jelly was what put most people off. Cold, translucent, with the eel suspended inside like some strange museum piece. Forks clinked against plates as regulars tucked in, dousing it all in vinegar, chatting and laughing as though nothing was unusual. For anyone new to it, though, the sight alone was enough to make the stomach turn. The taste wasn't the issue so much as the texture. The eel itself was mild, slightly fishy, but the chew of the meat, followed by the wobble of the jelly, made every bite an effort. Some kids were dared to try it, egged on by friends or older relatives. A few learned to stomach it, others swore never again. Jellied eels had their roots in necessity. The Thames used to teem with eels, cheap and easy to catch, and setting them in jelly meant they kept longer. By the 60s and 70s, the tradition had stuck, even if the popularity was fading. For the people who loved them, it wasn't just food, it was identity, tied to place and history. For everyone else, it was something to watch. From a safe distance, the jarred jelly, the slippery meat, the vinegar sting in the air. Jellied eels were a meal you either embraced fully or avoided entirely. There wasn't much in between. So, what about you? Did your mum or dad ever put these on the table? Or maybe your gran had her own horror dish. Drop it in the comments. We would love to hear your stories.